Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
My sister Emily has always had this uncanny ability to twist the knife with a smile on her face, that passive-aggressive brand of condescension wrapped in a silk ribbon of politeness, the kind of person who could call you a loser while complimenting your haircut. So when she called me in early December and said, in that syrupy tone she uses when she's about to say something unforgivable, "Rachel, I think it would be best for everyone if we kept things drama-free this Christmas," I already knew what was coming. Even before she launched into a rehearsed monologue about family harmony and how the vibe this year needed to be peaceful and positive. What she really meant was, "We're going to Hawaii for Christmas, and you're not invited." It wasn't shocking. Not really. Disappointing, sure, but not shocking. This has been the rhythm of our family dynamic for as long as I can remember. Emily gets center stage, and I'm either left backstage holding the curtain or locked outside the theater entirely. I played my role for years. I showed up. I smiled through clenched teeth. I brought nice gifts and said all the right things while she dominated every conversation, every photo, every story, all while pretending like she didn't notice the way our parents hovered around her like she was royalty. And me? I was always the afterthought. The one who chose to be single. The one who could have kids if she really wanted to. The one who owns property, but doesn't really have a family. So when I wasn't included in the group chat about flights and hotel bookings, when I didn't get the link to the Airbnb, or the "oh my gosh, we're so excited" texts from mom, I waited. I gave them a week. I let them plan, let them finalize their little tropical utopia. I waited until the very last moment, until Emily called me herself, trying to make it seem like a mutual decision, like I would be the one declining the invitation she never gave me before I said a word. And when she finally said, "It's just, every time you're around, it feels like something explodes," I nodded. I said, "No problem, Em. Have a great trip." And I meant it. Because by then, I had already called Tommy. Tommy's my property manager. He's in his 50s, divorced twice, always smells like paint thinner and barbecue sauce, and he's the most dependable person I know. I inherited the old house Emily lives in from our great-aunt Lorraine about 6 years ago. Back then, Emily had just had her second baby. Brent was recovering from a financial mess that apparently wasn't his fault, and they needed a place to stay for a few months. They moved in and never left. Not once did they offer rent. Not once did they ask if the arrangement still worked for me. They just assumed. Emily redecorated like it was her own, put up family photos, even had the audacity to change the locks once, said it was for safety, because of a break-in 2 blocks away. Never mind the fact that I own the place. Legally. On paper. On the damn deed. I never pushed it. I let it go year after year, because I didn't want to be the bad guy. I told myself they were family, and family doesn't make things transactional. But something shifted when she uninvited me. Not just the cruelty of it, but the ease. The casual way she discarded me, like removing a decorative pillow from the couch to make room for someone else. I realized then that Emily had never once thought of me as equal, as worthy of consideration, or even as a person who might get hurt. I was just an accessory to her narrative, the complicated sister, the one with emotional baggage, the one you leave behind because you don't want to explain her to your friends over cocktails in Maui. So I waited. I didn't send a text. I didn't pick a fight. I let them pack. I watched the photos roll in, the kids in their matching Hawaiian shirts, Brent holding a cocktail like he's in a damn travel magazine, my mother in a sunhat she's owned since I was in high school. And then, right after they boarded the plane, right after I got the TSA check-in alert on our shared airline app that Emily never realized I still had access to, I made the call. Tommy was waiting. The eviction notice was printed, signed, and sealed. Delivered that afternoon, taped to their front door with a cheerful little holiday sticker, a snowman holding a notice to vacate sign. 30 days. Legal. Binding. Merry Christmas. And the best part? Emily texted me from the tarmac, all fake joy and faux warmth. "Hope you're enjoying the quiet this year, Red Heart. Will FaceTime from the beach." I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the next thing she'd hear from me wouldn't be a petty message. It would be a legal document backed by every right I had spent 6 years suppressing in the name of family peace. Now, let me ask you something. What would you have done? If your sister had treated you like a nuisance your entire life, then had the gall to exclude you from the one thing that was supposed to unite you as a family, would you have smiled and let it go? Or would you have finally stood up and said, no more? Drop it in the comments, because I swear I've gone back and forth on this myself. But in that moment, as I watched the timestamp on the delivery photo Tommy sent me, the notice flapping gently on their pristine front door, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Not rage. Not revenge, even. Just the cool, still power of finally choosing myself. And I knew this was only the beginning. There's something particularly twisted about the way people use the word family when they mean you owe me. My sister Emily loved to weaponize that word, used it like a shield when she needed something and like a dagger when she didn't. Every time she wanted a favor, a bailout, or a sympathetic ear for whatever mess her husband Brent had walked them into, she'd pull out that old line, "We're family, Rachel. We stick together." But whenever I needed something, anything at all, a little respect, a return phone call, someone to take my side when our parents rolled their eyes at my life choices, somehow, suddenly, I was the black sheep again, the difficult one. The sister who just didn't understand how to be a team player. And that house, the one they'd been living in for years like it was their birthright, was the physical embodiment of that dynamic, the perfect little stage on which they could play house while I stood off to the side, holding the keys in my hand, pretending I wasn't being slowly erased from the story. 6 years ago, I had inherited that house from our great-aunt Lorraine, a stern but fair woman who had taken a shine to me during my late 20s and left me the old bungalow when she passed. It wasn't some sprawling mansion, but it was a solid, 2-story craftsman with a garden out back and a wraparound porch, a rare kind of property in our city, and one that meant something to me, even before it became a pawn in Emily's narrative of temporary living. Back then, she had just had her second child, a daughter named Lila, and Brent had lost his dental practice's lease due to what he insisted were unfair zoning ordinances, though I always suspected it had more to do with the shady way he handled billing. They were, in her words, in a bind, and when she asked if they could stay in the house for just a few months while they figured things out, I said yes, not because I owed her anything, but because, stupidly, I still believed in the kind of family loyalty they never once offered me. What began as a temporary solution quickly ossified into permanence. Emily never paid rent. She just took over the utilities and started sending me passive-aggressive texts anytime something broke, like it was somehow my responsibility to pay for a new water heater when she and her kids were the only ones using it. She remodeled the kitchen without asking, painted the living room some god-awful shade of taupe she saw on a Pinterest board, and hosted 4th of July parties like she was the proud homeowner entertaining neighbors, while I watched the Instagram stories like a stranger peering in through the glass. She never once said thank you. She never once acknowledged that I was the reason her kids had a backyard and a swing set and a home in a good school district. In fact, the only time she mentioned the ownership at all was when I asked if she'd considered moving now that Brent was working again and their finances had stabilized. She'd laughed, an actual short, breathy laugh, and said, "Rach, come on. It's not like we're strangers. This house is practically family." That phrase echoed in my head as I handed Tommy the envelope. He'd met me for lunch the week before at that greasy little diner he liked, and when I told him what I wanted to do, he didn't bat an eye. He just nodded, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said, "About damn time." Tommy had managed my properties for almost 10 years, and he had seen it all: squatters, angry exes, tenants who let raccoons nest in the attic, but even he had a special place in his heart for the kind of entitled chaos Emily brought to the table. "You've been too nice for too long," he told me. "Just because she's blood doesn't mean she's not a freeloader." I didn't want drama. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted what was mine: my house, my space, my right to set boundaries that didn't get bulldozed every time Emily decided I was too much or not enough, depending on the day. So when Tommy posted the notice, 30 days to vacate, per state law, he did it by the book. It was dated, signed, and attached to the front door like any other business transaction. And yet I knew, deep in my bones, that to Emily, this would not be seen as legal. It would be seen as betrayal, as war, as the ultimate violation of whatever fantasy world she had constructed, where she got to play homeowner, and I got to play silent benefactor. A few hours after the notice went up, I got a text from my mom, just a photo of the kids on the beach, smiling, holding pineapples, with the caption, "Wish you were here." And then one from Emily herself, sent at nearly the same time, which read, "Hope you're enjoying the quiet this year. Brent made my ties. We'll FaceTime tomorrow." It was all so cheerful, so perfectly timed, like they had rehearsed it, a staged performance designed to let me know just how replaceable I was, just how happy they were without me. I stared at that text for a long time, feeling nothing at first, then everything. Because what Emily didn't know, what none of them knew, was that while they were clinking glasses under the Hawaiian sun, basking in their sanitized, curated version of family togetherness, the house they had made into a monument of their delusions was already slipping through their fingers. And I wasn't going to say a word. Not yet. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest thing you can give someone. There's a moment, just before a storm hits, when the air feels unnaturally still, when birds vanish, the leaves stop rustling, and even the wind seems to hold its breath in anticipation of what's coming. And that's exactly what it felt like in the days after the eviction notice went up, like the entire universe was holding back, waiting for the scream, the rage, the fallout that had to come once Emily and Brent returned from their sun-drenched family vacation and realized that the world they had built on borrowed ground was about to crumble beneath their feet. The day after Christmas, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm coffee in hand, watching the gray sky through the window, knowing that somewhere across the ocean, Emily was sipping something sweet in a coconut shell, her toes buried in imported sand, completely unaware that a legal ticking time bomb was taped to her front door back home. I didn't feel guilty, not exactly, but I did feel something, not joy, not triumph, but a strange kind of release, like finally dropping a heavy bag I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was weighing me down. And even though I hadn't responded to her texts, even though I had ignored the cheerful pictures and hollow invitations to FaceTime, I knew it was only a matter of time before the calm shattered and reality came crashing in. Tommy, ever the efficient executor of revenge wrapped in professionalism, had taken photos of the posted notice, front and back, time-stamped, and emailed them to me the moment it was done. No drama, no confrontation, just cold, clean documentation of an overdue boundary finally being drawn in permanent marker. It was all legal, all by the book, and yet, as I clicked through the images, I could already hear Emily's voice in my head, that whiny edge she got whenever something didn't go her way, already accusing me of betrayal, of cruelty, of ruining her children's stability, like I hadn't been the one giving it to them on a silver platter for the better part of a decade. By the second day, the silence broke. It started with a single missed call from my dad, a man who, in my entire adult life, had only ever called me to confirm Thanksgiving start times or to ask if I still worked in real estate or whatever. No voicemail. No follow-up. Just a missed call that hung on my screen like a threat. Then came the message from my mother, less subtle, more cutting. "I just heard what you did. I don't understand how you could go so far. They're your family." No question mark. No attempt to hear my side. Just a quiet reprimand dipped in guilt and wrapped in that same tired narrative where Emily is always the victim and I am always the unpredictable force of destruction. But it was Brent's email that made me laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because of the sheer audacity. He had the nerve to write me at length, in full legalese, citing vague tenant rights and accusing me of acting out of personal spite and emotional instability, as if I hadn't been the one subsidizing their suburban fantasy for years while he played financial martyr and Emily staged their life, like a Pinterest board come to life. He ended the email with a smug, veiled threat, something about how it would be unfortunate if this became a public spectacle, as if he had anything on me that I hadn't already dragged through the mud and washed clean in my own private reckoning. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my attorney, who replied simply with, "Don't worry. It's weak." The funny thing about people like Emily and Brent is that they're so used to walking through life untouched, so used to charm and deflection getting them what they want, that when someone finally says no, when someone like me finally flips the table and says, "I'm done pretending this is fair," they don't know what to do. They panic. They overreact. And most importantly, they show their hand. The next day, Emily broke her silence. The message came via Instagram. Not directly to me, of course. She wouldn't dare give me that satisfaction. It was a story, a carefully curated post of her and the kids sitting on the beach, waves crashing behind them, and a caption that read, "Some people can't stand to see others happy. Some people wait until you're smiling just to try and rip it away." Sad. That was it. No names. No context. But it didn't need any. Our cousins, her friends, mutual acquaintances, everyone who followed both of us could read between the lines. She was casting herself as the injured party, the loving mother blindsided by her vindictive sister, and it made my blood boil, not because I cared about public perception, but because it was so perfectly, infuriatingly her, always the actress, always the wounded swan, always the one who got to cry while I was expected to clean up the mess. I stared at the post for a long time, tempted to respond, tempted to post my own version of the truth, tempted to burn it all down with screenshots and receipts and a running list of every time I'd paid for something she said she'd get me back for. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew better. Because real power doesn't scream. Real power waits. And I knew, without a doubt, that the moment their plane touched down and they pulled into that driveway, suitcase wheels dragging across the front walk, they would see it for themselves, the reality they'd ignored, the consequences they never believed would come, the undeniable truth taped right to their front door in legally binding ink. Justice, it turns out, doesn't always come in shouting matches or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it comes in the form of a registered letter and a silent refusal to keep playing a rigged game. And as I sat there, sipping my cold coffee and watching the clouds roll in, I realized something I hadn't dared believe before. I wasn't the villain in her story anymore. I was the editor. I was the one rewriting the ending. And this time, I wasn't pulling any punches. There's a kind of cold clarity that comes when you realize you're no longer asking for anyone's approval, no longer desperate for the scraps of affection or understanding you spent your entire life chasing like a starving dog circling the same dry table. And in those first few days after Emily's smug vacation bubble burst and the reality of the eviction set in, I found myself stepping fully into that clarity, not because it felt triumphant, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a bitter sweetness to it, but because it felt necessary, like shedding a skin I'd been suffocating under for years without even knowing it. When Emily and Brent landed and returned to the house, I imagine there must have been a full 3 minutes of confusion, a flicker of disbelief, and then that rising, righteous fury that only people who've never truly been told no can conjure. The kind of tantrum reserved for those who believe rules are for other people, that consequences are optional, and that the universe, or in this case, I, should just sit back and allow them to live without boundaries, obligations, or even the decency of gratitude. I didn't have to be there to see it. I knew her too well. I could picture it with perfect clarity, her standing on the porch in overpriced athleisure, kids whining in the car, Brent fumbling with the keys, and then seeing the same paper they had dismissed, now staring them in the face with 30 days of truth they couldn't charm their way out of. It took less than 6 hours for my phone to start lighting up like a pinball machine in a dive bar, one message after another, a full-scale family PR crisis unfolding in real time. My mother's text was the first and most ridiculous, some breathless attempt at guilt-laced diplomacy. "Rachel, I'm sure there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Emily says there was a mistake. Surely you didn't mean to send an eviction notice of all things during the holidays." As if I had accidentally slipped a legal document into a Christmas card. I didn't respond. I didn't explain. I owed no one an apology for reclaiming what was mine. Brent, however, decided to escalate. He left a long voicemail, 2.5 minutes of condescending lawyer speak peppered with veiled threats, empty ultimatums, and just enough gaslighting to make it clear he thought I'd crack under pressure. He rambled about community standing, about public image, about how it's one thing to be angry, Rachel, but quite another to destabilize your own niece and nephew during the school year, all while never once acknowledging that they had never paid rent, had never signed a lease, had never, in 6 years, treated that house like anything but a convenient inheritance they felt entitled to by bloodline alone. I sent the voicemail to my attorney, who laughed and told me, not for the first time, that entitlement doesn't hold up in court. Contracts do, signatures do, and the law, in this case, was entirely and unequivocally on my side. Still, the thing that always cuts deeper than legal threats, the thing Emily and my mother knew how to wield better than any court filing or Facebook rant, was guilt, the kind that's been instilled from childhood, sharpened over years of being told that love must be earned. That kindness comes with conditions, and that disappointment is always your fault, even when you're the one being trampled. So when my parents finally called a family Zoom, yes, an actual Zoom, because apparently this was now a corporate merger dispute, I knew it was going to be a parade of subtle manipulations dressed up as concern. And I was right. My father opened the call by clearing his throat 3 times, then launching into a long-winded speech about family values and how he always hoped we'd be closer, how hard it's been watching his daughters drift apart. My mother followed by asking, in her favorite pleading tone, if this was really the kind of legacy I wanted to leave, if this was how I wanted to be remembered, as if I was a eulogy instead of a living, breathing person who had finally found her voice. Then Emily chimed in, her voice thin and cracking, saying, "Rachel, I don't know what I did to make you hate me, but I'm begging you, don't do this to my kids. They love this home. It's all they've ever known." And that was the moment I felt the tug, not of guilt exactly, but of history, of years spent being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who made room for everyone else, who swallowed offense after offense, because keeping the peace felt like the only way to keep even a thread of connection. But that thread had frayed long ago, and now I saw it for what it was, a leash, not a bond. So I took a breath, looked straight into the webcam, and said with no emotion, no anger, just finality, "This is not personal. This is overdue." I ended the call before any of them could respond. I didn't wait for the inevitable protest, the tears, the second round of gasps and accusations. I didn't need to hear it. I had heard all of it before, just in different packaging. This time, I was done unwrapping it. The next morning, Emily showed up at my door. I had just finished brewing coffee when the knock came, not a timid knock, not a hopeful one, but the urgent, rapid-fire knock of someone who believes they are owed something, who believes that proximity and blood and history give them the right to show up without warning. I opened the door, slowly, and there she was, no makeup, hair pulled back, eyes already red, 2 kids in the car behind her watching cartoons on a tablet. She didn't say hello. She didn't apologize. She just said, "Where are we supposed to go, Rachel? Do you even care what this is doing to my family?" I looked at her, really looked, and for a second, I did feel something. Not sympathy, not regret, but the echo of an old ache, the part of me that once would have folded, once would have said, "Okay, let's forget it," just to avoid the discomfort. But that version of me had packed up and moved out a long time ago, and in her place stood a woman who was tired of being a footnote in her own life. So I said nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. I simply stepped back, slowly, and closed the door in her face. Because sometimes silence is not just power, sometimes it's precision. And I was done aiming wide. The first day of January arrived with a sky so blank and pale it looked like the world itself had given up on pretending to be cheerful, and as I stood in my living room, holding a chipped coffee mug I'd had since college, watching the smoke curl from the fireplace as if trying to escape its own source, I couldn't help but wonder, for the first time in weeks, if maybe, just maybe, I'd gone too far. Not in the legal sense, not even in the familial sense, because every document I'd signed, every word I'd spoken, Every line I'd drawn had been entirely within the bounds of my rights, my patience, and, frankly, my exhaustion. No, what gnawed at me, slow and dull like an old bruise pressing against bone, was the knowledge that no matter how justified I had been, no matter how necessary it had all felt in the moment, I had still taken something that couldn't be undone. I had removed the ground from under someone who had never believed I had the power to do it, and watching them fall, even if they deserved it, wasn't as satisfying as I had always imagined. Emily and Brent moved out 3 days before the 30-day deadline expired, which surprised no one more than me, considering how loudly Brent had insisted they would fight this all the way to the top, as if this were a courtroom drama and not a simple, boring matter of vacating a property they had occupied without a lease for more than half a decade. They didn't contact me. Not directly. Emily posted a vague message on Facebook, something about a difficult new chapter and trusting the journey, and our mother, predictably, shared it with a long, pitying caption about how no one really knows what people are going through behind closed doors, which made me laugh out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was so nakedly manipulative, a desperate attempt to spin a story without ever once acknowledging who had been holding up the roof of those closed doors all those years. The house was left clean, eerily so, as if they had scrubbed away not just the physical mess, but every sign they had ever lived there, trying to erase themselves before I had the chance to see them exposed and vulnerable. Tommy walked me through it, every room, every cabinet, every outlet checked with the same grim precision he brought to all his inspections, and when we reached the master bedroom, where the beige walls still bore faint shadows from pictures that had been taken down, he turned to me and said, "I've seen a lot of exits, but this one feels like they wanted to leave before you could see them break." And for once, I didn't have a quip, or a joke, or even a tired sigh to offer in return. I just nodded and stared at the room, the air inside it still warm from their departure, and I wondered if maybe I had finally gotten what I wanted, not revenge, not justice, but an ending. But endings, as I've learned, don't always feel like closure. Sometimes they feel like silence where noise used to be, or like an unanswered question that lingers even after the test is over. And that night, as I sat alone in my apartment, watching the fireplace flicker across the reflection of the empty glass I hadn't bothered to refill, I found myself searching for something that would make it all feel complete, some internal exhale that never came. My phone was quiet. My inbox was empty. The group chat that used to buzz around holidays now sat dormant, the final message a photo of the Hawaii trip, the smiling faces now strangely hollow in retrospect. A few minutes before midnight, I checked the mailbox downstairs, mostly out of habit, and found a single envelope, handwritten, no return address. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The slanted loops of her writing, the way she always dotted her I a little too high, had been burned into my memory since childhood. I stood there, holding it under the flickering hallway light, debating whether to read it now or later or never, and finally, curiosity won over restraint. Inside was a short letter, barely a paragraph, written in the kind of uneven tone that suggested she'd rewritten it a dozen times and still wasn't satisfied. She didn't apologize. Of course not. She didn't admit fault or acknowledge the years of taking without gratitude. She didn't even mention the eviction. Instead, she wrote about the kids, how confused they were, how hard it had been to explain why they couldn't go home, how Lila had asked if I was mad at her, which, I'll admit, landed like a weight against my chest in a way nothing else had. She ended with a line I've read 100 times since then, each time with a different interpretation. "I hope someday you realize what you lost." Not what she lost. What I lost. As if this had all been a trade. As if the cost of reclaiming my self-respect, of finally saying no, of refusing to be the family doormat one more year, had been the relationship itself, which, perhaps, it had been. I didn't respond. I didn't tear the letter up, or burn it, or cry over it. I placed it back in the envelope, slid it into the drawer next to my passport and old birthday cards, and closed it without ceremony, because I didn't need to perform grief or guilt for a version of family that had only ever existed in theory. The days passed. I went back to work. I rekeyed the house and listed it for rent, not out of spite, but because it was time to put the property to use again, to let it serve a purpose that wasn't soaked in unspoken resentment. And still, even in the quiet, the letter stayed with me, a whisper in the back of my mind during long drives and quiet evenings, challenging me with its ambiguity. Maybe I did lose something. Maybe the version of myself who always kept the peace, who always stayed quiet to avoid the inevitable backlash, maybe she really did die in the process of all this. And maybe that was the point. Because sometimes, in choosing yourself, you burn the bridge behind you, not out of cruelty, but to ensure you never again cross it back into a place that kept you small. Sometimes, you stop answering the phone, not to hurt them, but to finally hear yourself think. And sometimes, yes, you become the villain in someone else's story, not because you were wrong, but because they needed a villain more than they ever needed a mirror. And that's the part no one ever tells you. Justice doesn't always feel clean, or triumphant, or even fair. Sometimes it just feels like silence, heavy, honest, and long overdue.